Welcome back to Worth a Shot, the series where I recommend some of my favorite games to you. Now this is the first time I actually made one of these videos very close to a game's release. If you've read the title, you already know that I want to talk about Resident Evil 7, and you might also be aware that it has only come out a few weeks ago. Normally I wouldn't talk about a so recent game, but I got a key for the game and it definitely left a good impression, so I thought I might as well make a video for it. So let's get started. Resident Evil 7 is obviously the 7th main entry in the Resident Evil franchise. I personally never really cared for the Resident Evil games in general. I've played a few, including 4 and 5, but I never went out of my way to go back and play any of the older games. Mostly because I don't like third-person survival horror games. What I do care for are very immersive games. If you look around my channel, it is fairly obvious that I play a lot of Skyrim, and I always try to make the game as immersive as possible, by either removing unnecessary HUD elements or adding things to the world that make it feel more believable. And that is the exact thing Resident Evil 7 got me with. The immersion. There are no obstructing HUD elements on the screen at all times, there are no big hints or waypoints that tell you where to go next. The game does a very good job at keeping HUD elements to the absolute minimum, without being a hindrance. The only things you will ever see are prompts for interacting with objects, your ammo count while shooting, and some effects for when you are hurt. And when you're just walking around without anything going on, even those elements simply disappear. That, in combination with the newly added first-person perspective, makes the horror elements of the game a lot more scary and believable, and is exactly what drew me in. While the first-person perspective is quite different to the third-person camera of the other games, I actually believe that it works better for games of the survival horror genre. It just gives you the opportunity to immerse yourself more in the game. Other than that, the game is still Resident Evil. Meaning you will make your way through the several buildings of the game while solving puzzles, shooting monsters and trying to manage your inventory. Speaking of which, since your inventory space is very limited, you will find yourself making several trips between some areas and your storage box. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you have cleared an area of enemies, they will not respawn, and new enemies will only spawn in previously cleared areas as you progress through the game. That in turn means that you'll spend a lot of your time just collecting items without any imminent threat. This is not as big of a concern on the highest difficulty, since enemy and item spawns are changed, but on normal and easy it is probably the slowest part of the game. In terms of design and graphics, the game looks really good. The buildings and outside areas are very detailed and clutter and interactable items are placed in a very believable manner. In general, it looks like how a somewhat abandoned old house in the middle of Louisiana would look like if it had a bunch of secret stuff built in and a family of crazy people living in it. Graphically it's not mind-blowing, but it still looks very good, even on lower settings. Although I did notice that the game looks a little bit blurry at times. Don't really know why, but it is there. Speaking of settings, the PC version of Resident Evil is actually a very good port. It runs very well and has basically all the graphics options you could ever want. I would have liked some more anti-aliasing settings, but the game makes somewhat up for that with a resolution scaling option. Now let's talk story. The game starts off with the main character Ethan Winters looking for his wife, who has been missing for 3 years. He received an email telling him to pick her up in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. Of course, he promptly drives there only to find a big and seemingly abandoned house. And everything goes downhill from there. I'm obviously not going to spoil anything for you because the game is actually quite story driven, but let me just say that the story seems very confusing and weird at first, but as everything starts to come together, it actually isn't too bad. Well, at least for a Resident Evil game. It has some very interesting characters and intriguing twists, but it is very linear and towards the end fairly predictable. It also doesn't really show any connection to the other games except in one scene. If that is a good thing or not is up to you. I personally enjoyed the story, but I have seen better. Okay, now who do I think this game is for? Well, if you're into horror games in general and a Resident Evil fan, this game is probably a must-buy for you. If you like horror games but got turned off by games like Outlast or Amnesia because you had no way of fighting back, you might want to try this game instead. And if you cannot deal with horror games and jump scares at all, I don't even know why you came here, because this game is obviously not for you. In conclusion, Resident Evil 7 is a great game that goes back to the horror roots of its old predecessor while emphasizing both immersion and story. It isn't too long though. I finished my first playthrough in under 6 hours, and unless you plan on playing through the game more than once, the price of $50 might not be worth it to you. There is also a season pass available for a few pieces of DLC that will hopefully expand the story and provide some more gameplay, but it will also set you back another $30. I would hold off until all the DLC is released and then check whether or not it is worth it. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.